record on this computer then maybe, yeah. Okay, so I started to record now. Okay, so nice warm welcome here from the west of Ireland, and we're having a debate today on dairy and cancer, or as John put it, the holy cow. And let's see what we can sort of find out on this very pressing topic. Now, first, we want to see, can you see my screen there with this nice sort of plant-based and milk report? So you're talking about dairy, and in order to sort of get really sort of the gist of it, we need to know what's actually in it. And we see there's 1.25 grams saturated fat, 15 gram cholesterol. And as you see easily in the table, cholesterol is unique amongst all the milk through the obviously animal milk. And then there's 3.3 gram protein. And these are containing branched amino acids, isoleucine, leucine, and valine. And we come to that a bit later to see what the significance of that may be. No, you see my slides there. Now, David Ludwig and Walter Willett from the Harvard Medical School wrote, dairy milk evolved to promote the growth of grazing animals at high risk of predation when small. As this nice picture there.
Sorry to interrupt, Ulrich. Ulrich, we can't see, some people can't see your screen.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen, but
then it must be the other people's setting, I don't know. Can you see it?
It says, some people have told me that Ulrich hasn't shared his screen, but I can see it.
Then you can, yeah, okay. I don't know what else I could do then, because it does show that screen as being shared. So that should be fine. You can still see it.
Yeah, I can see you perfectly, but Johnny can't.
And do you see the picture with the cow on it? Or what do you see?
No, no, I can't see the screen share. I can only see, oh, sorry. You mean we can't see the screen share, Ulrich?
What image do you see? What is shared right now? Is anything shared at all?
No.
Nothing is shared. Okay.
Nothing is shared. It's just your video.
All right.
Sorry, yeah, just to confirm, Stephanie, I can't see it either. I can only see Ulrich's video.
Can you see now something?
Now we can see, yeah.
Now we're talking, right. Yes. Now the good news is you haven't missed too much, but I might get back to that first slide here, which was here the milks. Can you see that slide with the milks?
Yeah.
The plant-based report? Yeah, so I'm just put that up to show you the different components of the milk. And as I say, basically I wanted to hone in to here the cholesterol there, which is unique to animal products in general and milk in particular, the saturated fats, and then the protein, which I say the special feature of the dairy is that it contains branched amino acids. We will come later to that in the talk as we go back to that. So, can you see this little picture now?
Yes, we can indeed.
As I was saying, Walter Willett and David Ludwig, they were saying that dairy milk has evolved to allow grazing animals at high risk of predation to evolve and to grow very fast. So the consequence of a lifetime of human exposure to the growth factors in milk have not been well studied. They continue on. And milk consumption increases serum concentration of insulin-like growth factor, an anabolic hormone linked to prostate and other cancers. In addition, modern industrial methods maintain dairy cows in active milk production throughout successive pregnancies, resulting in a milk supply with high levels of productive estrogen. So basically what they are referring to is that in America, as well as in Ireland, cows are impregnated once a year, or a third, or fathered, or whatever you want to call it. So that essentially means that they are pregnant 9 months out of 12. And that essentially means that during that time, they have very high estrogen and progesterone levels, which of course go into the milk. So we have here a nice cocktail of not only the cholesterol and these acids, but we have insulin-like growth factor, we have bovine hormone, and we have estrogen and progesterone in very high concentrations. Now, why is all that a problem? You see, as I said, the cow wants obviously the calf to grow very fast. So that's why the cow puts in these hormones. And the truth is that a calf has to grow 40 times faster than a human baby. Obviously, therefore, there has to be very high hormone content in that. So what is the problem then with animal protein, if you maybe start on that? Oh, that's actually a very nice slide which Shireen Kassam has shared with me, which just explores what else is all in the milk. We already talked about the estrogen. We talked about the growth hormone and the IGF, but then there's also galactose. We come to that later, what the relevance of that is. Saturated fat we will cover. Casein we will cover, and then of course there's pesticides as well. And one could have added another arrow here for viruses, and we'll come to that too. Okay, this is by Shireen Kassam, and that's a nice slide she has. Now there was sort of this headline recently in the press room from the University of Southern California, which was that meat and cheese may be as bad for you as smoking. And even The Guardian had a similar headline, diets high in meat, eggs, and dairy could be as harmful to health as smoking. And this study was from the NHANS group, which involved 6,400 people. And that's the link there to that study there, which were 50 to 60 years old. They were taking a high protein intake, and you could show they have a 75% increase in mortality. Perfect. I just had meeting people there. That's grand. And the interesting thing was, if the protein was plant-based, there was no increase in mortality for people. And this is one of the diagrams from that study, which shows that the insulin-like growth factor goes up according to the animal protein intake. And you see this is quite significant there. And that is then the problem with these amino acids. As I said, the branched amino acids particularly, they are going into the pathways here for the TOR, and all these other receptors lead to genomic instability. And the glucose also goes into this pathway. A bit of a difficult diagram, I suppose. And here's an even more complicated diagram for those who are not already fully confused. But it basically just shows you the cancer pathway, which goes from the different components of the milk. Here we have the branched amino acids, here we have the estrogen, here we have the androgen precursors, here we have insulin, and here we have IGF. As you can see, all these act synergistic to activate the TORC pathway, and then leading to overactivation and tumorigenesis, which should be relevant for a couple of different cancers, as we will cover now very soon. And there's also microbiome changes which are important, because the high fat diets lead to increased enteric deoxycholic concentration. So these extra secondary bile acids is a product of microbial metabolism. So as you all know, if you eat animal products, you have different microbiomes than if you eat plant-based products. These different microbes you get, they are more likely to produce the secondary bile acids, and they promote then cancer in turn. And you can see that here very nicely as well, saturated fat and cholesterol. These are the metabolic components. These are the bacteria there which they cause. And unfortunately, they are then doing cell damage and can be relevant in cancer prognosis. Now, we want to talk about colon cancer next. Dagfinn Ornem has analyzed 19 cohort studies in 2012. And he had to concede that total dairy decreased the risk of colon cancer. And he and his colleagues concluded that this meta-analysis shows that milk and total dairy products, but not cheese or other dairy products, are associated with a reduction in colorectal cancer risk. But later on, they admit in their same paper, higher intake of milk and dairy products may be associated with other health behaviors, including higher levels of physical activity, lower prevalence of smoking, and overweight, obesity, and lower intakes of alcohol and red and processed meats. So there could be a bias there that people who have more dairy products, they have a healthier lifestyle in total. That's the one concession they make. And the other issue is, of course, the calcium. The calcium is relevant because it may bind up the pro-inflammatory bile acids you were talking about earlier. Right? So the calcium may be a factor in that. And then they looked at that, what the calcium does. You see first for prostate cancer things, but here you also see then the dairy calcium, dairy calcium and non-dairy calcium. And that may have different effects. So we come back to that when we talk about prostate cancer later as well. Now the problem is, of course, dairy calcium is that you have other problems, which is sort of cardiovascular side effects from that calcium. Whereas if you have dark leafy greens with your calcium, you won't get that. So that's sort of what I want to say about colon cancer. So yes, there may be a reduction that may be due to the calcium, but as I say, we have sort of problems, a trade-off with the calcium for cardiovascular disease. And then, as I say, the question is what happens to supplement? You have the same effect, but then with dark leafy greens, you don't have the side effects on cardiovascular point of view, because you then have a higher nitrous oxide, which you can release, particularly with addition of vinegar. So that's the story about colon cancer and dairy. So next, then prostate cancer.
5 minutes remaining, Ulrich.
Oh, is that all? Oh gosh, right. Too bad. For the prostate cancer, I actually wanted to show these pictures here. See, this is a map of dairy intake worldwide. And you see the darkest blue is the countries with the highest dairy intake. And then we go 2 slides further and see the countries with the highest breast cancer incidence and the highest prostate cancer incidence. Right. And if one doesn't take any slide home from this talk, then one might just remember this, that these countries are basically the same as these ones. So where we have the highest dairy consumption, we have both the highest prostate cancer incidence and the highest breast cancer incidence. So that was that about the dairy. So this is again here for the prostate cancer risk and dairy. Dagfinn Orne has analyzed 32 cohort studies for this paper. He found that high intakes of dairy products, milk, low-fat milk, cheese, and total dairy and dairy calcium, but not supplementary or non-dairy calcium, may increase total prostate cancer risk. So here again, with the prostate cancer, we have this calcium effect. So that the high calcium intake, the high dairy intake increases prostate cancer risk, but not actually if you use non-dairy calcium. You see, actually with non-dairy calcium, the prostate cancer risk even goes down, right? But with dairy calcium, the prostate cancer risk goes up. So that's quite interesting. And Harrison suggests in his paper that IGF may be sort of a strong factor, as I showed you earlier in these diagrams there, for the prostate cancer increase. And then we're talking about the TOR pathway as well, which I had alluded to earlier. And we had already talked about the pregnant cows. So you better get a few slides in. And this is a very interesting paper by Ornish, which actually shows if you put people on a plant-based diet with established prostate cancer, that you can actually see that their prostate-specific antigen actually goes down. Obviously, that's plant-based diet outrules our other animal products, but certainly it shows that we can actually reverse some of these detrimental effects. Now, next in breast cancer. There's a few things to consider with breast cancer. First, we mentioned already there might be a viral connection. Bovine leukemia virus is implicated in breast cancer. Feeding cows with silage with red clover also increases phytoestrogens and leads to growth of breast cancer cells. And estrogen and progesterone levels are particularly high in modern dairy cattle, as I already expressed earlier, because of the high impregnation rate. And high dietary fat is increasing the incidence of breast cancer-related deaths and disimproving survival after breast cancer. And the branch chain fatty acids increase, as we said earlier, IGF-1, and that's, of course, a big factor in breast cancer there. This is just a nice study here which shows here the increase in dairy consumption and the increase in breast cancer with that. So that is a quite sort of convincing summary there. Now, next, ovarian cancer. With ovarian cancer, the issue seems to be mostly lactulose, which is metabolized to galactose. And more hydrolyzed lactulose, particularly found in cottage cheese and yogurt, and the consumption of the latter, at least monthly, was associated with increased ovarian cancer risk. There was a big meta-analysis by Larsens from 2005-2006, and prospective cohort studies also confirmed that. This slide here, which I'm showing here, is from a Swedish birth register, and I think that shows it quite nicely. These examining lactose intolerant people, comparing them with lactose tolerant ones, and looking at the incidence of ovarian, a standard incidence rate. And you can see for ovary, that goes quite significant down in the people who are lactose intolerant.
1 minute remaining, Ulrich.
I am actually done.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Ulrich. That's brilliant. Thanks for the presentation, and that was very interesting. If you have any questions, everybody, we'll save them just until after John has spoken. And Ulrich, there's a chance that the recording might stop when you pass over the host. But we can ask, if that's the case, we can ask John to record the second half of the debate. So thanks very much, Ulrich. That was fantastic.
I'd probably ask you to take over so I'm not distracted. Sean?
Yeah,
you take
absolutely. John, did you want to use the share screen? That's the only thing.
I hadn't planned to show slides. I wasn't aware that I would be able to do so with my device. So I'm very happy just to...
Oh, that's perfect. Well, that's great, John. I can record on this side and you can focus on your talk.
Great.
I give you back then the host, Sean.
You can, Ulrich. Thank you. That's great.
I've done that now. It still seems to be recording.
Yes, it's still recording, so that's perfect.
Ulrich.
That's great. So we'll move over now to the green corner, and or the red corner. The red corner, I should say.
I'm dressed in white for the Milk Dairy Board. For my sponsorship, to get my full sponsorship, I even have to wear the hat. But I'll put that to one side while I try and remain neutral. First of all, thank you, everyone, for coming along and giving your time tonight. Ulrich, thank you for your excellent presentation.
You're too kind.
Connor, for starting this off with his comment on WhatsApp about the EPIC study showing a protective effect on bowel cancer with dairy. And I think it's very useful when we're sort of stopped in our tracks and asked to consider, you know, what is happening in the world of nutrition. Sometimes what we believe very strongly in our own world is being reinforced by ourselves and our thought processes. And I really like that Connor will act as an inspiration for getting us thinking outside our box. It's very strange to be taking part in a debate that I actually don't mind losing. I started doing the research on this topic 3 days ago and thought it was going to be a simple matter of pulling up the EPIC study and looking at the evidence in dairy and colorectal cancer, and I'm sure there were many holes in it and we'd sort that out. But like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole, there was no going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. There's there's such an overwhelming amount of data and so many different studies that at times it really, you can take whatever truth you like out of it. As a distraction, as I was working, it was helpful just to crack on the vegan jokes. How can you tell if somebody's vegan at a party? Don't worry, they'll tell you again and again and again. How many vegans does it take to change a light bulb? None. Everybody knows they can't change a damn thing. How many meat eaters does it take to change a light bulb? None, because they'd rather stay in the dark. Well, we are different. We do have a different health belief than many of our patients. And when we are promoting a plant-based approach, we have to be absolutely strong in the evidence that we use and accept that there are anomalies and that at times we don't have a clear answer to these anomalies. Nutrition is such a difficult subject. We're all aware of the fact that most of our studies are observational cohort studies with all the biases involved in both in dairy, in the many different types of dairy, the collecting the data even from diaries, whether there are different thresholds at which dairy causes different issues, the different trigger factors that Ulrich mentions. It's a highly complicated process. Thankfully, the means of analysis have improved and the depth of complexity that we can study is growing as more and more studies become available. Dairy is a bit of a sacred cow. Dairy drinking is the norm in Ireland. We have the highest, one of the highest intakes annually in the world. We drink approximately 135 litres per person, twice the European average. The US, strangely, is 55% of our consumption. China is 6%, but rising. And now both China and India are self-sufficient in dairy, and we can no longer export to them as we had in the past. As countries become wealthier, taking more dairy is going to be part of that, that need that they see as attaining a better lifestyle. Day two, I was finding things very complex. The data did not seem to be consistent across different groups. So I was looking at the particular tools that I would use. Up to date, a very useful evidence-based program that I'm sure most of the doctors here will use as a way of drilling down on the hard facts that are available to us and accepted by the community. That was a very useful baseline to look what is accepted in our community as the data that we would commonly agree on when it comes to cancer. We all know that powerful influences, the dairy industry, the meat industry, can affect the cancer guidelines for individual countries. And the US guidelines and the Irish guidelines, as we know, have been recently updated. The US guidelines in June, and in this week, our own cancer registry have given changes. It is interesting to see that the US are now leading the field in terms of being stricter in terms of red meat and processed meat, and that they are ahead of us now. Interestingly, neither of them directly take on the dairy issue. One tool that I kept coming across was the World Cancer Research Fund, combined with the American Institute for Cancer Research, their continuous update project, which has been going since 1993. They report usually every 10 years, and their initial report in the 1990s was quite anecdotal and simplistic. A further 10 years later was more complex, and evidence towards a plant-based approach was emerging. Their latest report came in 2018. I thought I would take a look at it and saw that it was 116 pages, expected that I'd take a quick dive in and out, and that really that would suffice. The World Cancer Research Fund is a non-profit that unifies a network of global cancer charities dedicated to cancer prevention. They analyze the most authoritative data on cancer prevention and diet from around the world and try and help us make informed choices. They try to influence policy at the highest level and advise governments around the world. Their continuous update project database is systematically reviewed by a team in the Imperial College London, and they use an independent panel of cancer experts to review the evidence. It has 5 levels of grading evidence based on the criteria. The very strongest is convincing at a level that they would make a public health recommendation. So they were now able to do this with processed meat. And this was the strongest level. The next level down is strong probable cause. And again, this is a very strong weighting for evidence. And it's interesting to see that they were able to make this recommendation for dairy and colorectal cancer. We'll come back to that in a moment. The next 3 categories are limited but suggestive evidence, limited evidence, they cannot draw a conclusion, and the final category, strong evidence of a substantial risk unlikely, which again is very useful. Looking at their evidence and the way they present it, it has very definitely influenced both our national cancer guidelines and the American ones. Of course, looking up individual papers, resorting to PubMed and Google Scholar is a very useful way for us to get up-to-date advice. Looking at the summary of advice on dairy from the World Cancer Research Fund, their summary was, there's strong probable evidence that dairy decreases the risk for colorectal cancer. We shall look at this shortly. There is limited suggested evidence that it decreases the risk for premenopausal breast cancer. There is limited suggested evidence that it increases the risk for prostate cancer. And for ovarian cancer, there was limited evidence and they could not come to a conclusion. I suppose we would not be too surprised to hear that about ovarian cancer because it is a cancer with low incidence, so it's more difficult to perhaps draw conclusions on the data. So if we may start with our ovarian cancer, the typical patient is going to be in their 60s. The median age is 63. And given that there is no definite role for diet in the data that is proposed, I think it behoves us when we're dealing with this patient to be kind to them. They are now at an advanced stage in their life. Certainly, if they wish to discuss the data, Ulrich will bring up perhaps the Cook County, Illinois data where an increased hazard risk was shown for milk. But against that, the Women's Health Study did not show any risk for dairy. So
5 minutes remaining, John.
For each study that one presents, there are other studies to show the opposite. When we come to prostate cancer is one where I will have to gladly let Ulrich take full credit for what he mentions. When we're facing our patient with prostate cancer, though, here we have an elderly male. Most of them are in their 60s. 1 in 7 men in Ireland in their lifetime, 3,300 a year in Ireland. And we know that dairy has a link with prostate cancer. Is the prostate cancer going to be aggressive enough that we would ask him to make this major lifestyle change? Are there not compromises? Cutting down to skim milk? There is evidence to suggest that lower fat milk decreases the risk. Perhaps adding in cruciferous vegetables. We know that the lycopene in tomatoes would help. There's strong suggestion that soy would. Perhaps we'd look at his fish oil supplements or the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors we've been giving him for his benign prostate enlargement. Given that over 80% of men over in their 70s are going to have this condition, and most of them are going to die with it rather than of it, I think we have to take an approach that is cognizant of the fact that for many people this will not be an aggressive cancer, and there will be other ways, more powerful ways, that we can help them. Clearly, we won't hide the evidence, but we have to be compassionate in dealing with our patients. Next, we come to bowel cancer. So our patient comes in with bowel cancer. He's one of the 2,700 annually that come in. He's more likely to be a man, and the majority of them, again, will be over 50. The interesting evidence here is that the risk with bowel cancer can be helped with dairy, and the risk seems to reflect the total amount of dairy in a non-linear fashion, but such that the more calcium you take, the higher quantities of calcium, the more dairy you're taking, the better in terms of this particular risk. Cheese does not show the same associations. Would it not be kinder to hone in perhaps on cutting down on the red meat, skipping the processed meat, try more fish, cut down on your tobacco and alcohol, try and exercise? Even eating half an apple a day will be helpful, and taking more whole grains. It is a difficult problem. Here we have somebody that dairy may help, but it'll increase his risk of prostate cancer. You're left between the devil and the deep blue sea there. Perhaps if it was Betty rather than Bart, we might be discussing it differently for a woman. This is a very definite dilemma that's turning up, that the evidence in 12 of the 14 meta-analyses that were studied by the World Cancer Research Fund showed a protective effect of dairy for bowel cancer.
1 minute remaining, John.
Very good. So we may go on to oops-a-daisy, to breast cancer. And in looking at breast cancer, I'm running out of time, but it would be clear that in premenopausal women, dairy products have limited suggestion of protection, and in diets high in calcium have a positive effect in decreasing the risk in both premenopausal and postmenopausal women. Now, the evidence is limited but suggestive. This is not what I wanted to see, but the evidence is clearly laid out in these studies, and I would strongly suggest that we all take a look at this data, because it is going to be something that we will be faced with over time.
That's time. So, whenever you're ready to wrap up, John.
It appears to be a complex area, and unfortunately, the calcium in plants doesn't seem to offer any protective effect in bowel cancer. So there are dilemmas that we have to face and to look and ask further questions. Nobody can take from the fact that we know that vegans and vegetarians generally have better health outcomes and lower mortality. It's just we must recognize that when it comes to cancer, the picture is more muddied and more complex than we would like. Thank you for your patience.
John, thank you. Excellent. John, thanks very much. That was a very important side to the debate, I know for me anyway, just to hear the oversight and hear the studies that back up that argument. We'll now open it up for questions. I know, Sean, I had meant at the very start to allow you to welcome everyone, Sean. You might maybe do the goodbye at the end. I was just trying to get Ulrich the screen share, but I'm sure you want to say a welcome, so we'll make that a nice goodbye at the end. So what we'll do now, guys, if there's any questions, I'll unmute. I've got no questions through just yet. There was a comment from Sean where he said it was true. I think it was, I'm not sure what cancer he was referring to, but he said it was true that the risk was low for many of his patients. Not so aggressive that he needs to cut back on his cappuccino. So I'm going to unmute everyone here now. 1 second.
Actually, Sean.
Yes, John.
Can I ask, does Ulrich want to respond to John because he hasn't had a chance to counter any argument?
Yeah, absolutely. Johnny, if what John had suggested initially was that we do the questions and then both speakers get a chance to round up at the end.
Super.
Would that cover that, Johnny?
Yeah, yeah.
No, 1 second. Sorry, I'm just figuring out how to unmute everyone here.
I probably would leave that to the individuals who actually want to say something.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because some people, just allow everyone to unmute themselves.
Yeah.
Rather than unmuting them actually, because some people might have background noises, drilling and whatever.
Great. If anyone would like to raise their hands if they have a question. Johnny, I think you're unmuted there already.
I have a question for Ulrich.
Very good.
I heard you saying that by feeding cows red clover,
Yes.
the increased phytoestrogens led to an increase in breast cancer.
That's right. That's right. That was a very interesting.
That was counterintuitive to me.
Yes, that was a bit of a surprise, I must admit that. But it just shows, it's because you see, we are always sort of boasting here in Ireland. Oh yes, they're all grass-fed and it's all fine, and we don't have to worry about them at all. They're all lovely pets, nearly. But the truth is, they're not really all grass-fed, are they? Ireland has actually imported more fodder for the animals than it has imported food for people. And the sad thing is we are importing nearly all our vegetables and greens because so little is grown in Ireland. 98% of our agricultural land is actually given to cattle and animal agriculture. So that actually leaves us this very little land. But as I say, going back to those cows, let me see now, here, where is that? That's reference 26, hold on a second now. I have to find that paper there. So that was a paper by Nielsen and Gustafsson, proliferative effect of whey from cows' milk varying in phytoestrogen in human breast and post-cancer cells. Let me see if I can find that paper there.
Ulrich, while you're looking for it, I'm just going to sort of add a little bit, which is when Gregor explains this, he often explains the phytoestrogens acting on alpha and beta receptors and preferentially choosing beta receptors until you get to a certain level where it overflows onto the alpha receptors, and beta receptors are protective and alpha are negative. So I would have thought that phytoestrogens are beneficial, and this is why soy has this fear about it being associated with breast cancer, and I would have assumed that phytoestrogens would prevent breast cancer, not provoke it.
You are absolutely right. There's this conundrum with the difference of those two, and that is certainly true for soy, and that's certainly true for other phytoestrogens in plants we eat directly. But apparently it seems to be, as Nielsen puts out in his paper there, that with the red clover, that works the other way around. So that these phytoestrogens are obviously promoting tumor growth rather than inhibiting it. As you correctly say, it depends. Yes, exactly, because they're going through the cow, so to speak. So they're producing, they're obviously addressing those both receptors there. That is the problem.
but they're not sure if it's the phytoestrogen that passes through the cow to cause breast cancer in humans, or is it the fertilizer used on red clover that goes through the cows to.
That is another topic, but it mainly goes here about the phytoestrogen. Yes, that was their point of argument here in their paper. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Johnny. Anyone else have any questions? If you'd like to just raise your hand or any comments to make. Yes, Sean, work away. You're unmuted there now, Sean.
Okay. I'll just put this light so it's a halo. That's a halo behind me.
Oh, perfect.
yeah. So, no, well, I was afraid, I was going to ask this at the end, but I think if John Dagnan maybe signs us out would be better, considering of all the work that went in tonight. It's present himself and Ulrich and yourself, Sean. But no, I wanted just to ask, particularly John, but also Ulrich, about, you detailed a lot of papers there that either support dairy or are equivocal. And, if you did scan down to the funding section and you find that it's funded by a national board or a university with no ties to dairy, how did that make you feel? That maybe maybe on balance you might still hold to your position that dairy is an issue, but when you read a paper that doesn't agree with where you were a month ago or 6 weeks ago, how did you navigate that? To John Dagnan.
I think that's a real dilemma for us, Sean. The credibility of a body. I emailed Connor about the World Cancer Research Fund and their credibility, and he felt it was an excellent resource and felt they would have constraints how they would interpret data, but that as a resource, he would have no problem with them. And I really couldn't get, I felt, a better imprimatur than Connor's when it came to that. When we look at it, the Imperial College in London, describing itself as an international body, a network of cancer charities funding both research and trying to put a message out. I think the beauty about this, Sean, is it gets above a national level. In the States, we worry about the cattle ranchers, the strength of individual powers to influence it. But if you have a body that's based both in the States and in London, perhaps there's a better chance of it getting away from that. One of the really positive things I found looking at the data is you could keep drilling down to look at it. They would show how they had arrived at each decision. Looking at the EPIC study on colorectal cancer, well, they were looking at meta-analysis studies, 14 of them, showing 12 of them were actually showing a positive effect for dairy. One had a null effect and one had an insignificant level of positive risk factor. I didn't get a feeling that I'm being sold a pup here. I think if there's one study, it may be an outlier, but when you're seeing meta-analyses and you have the ability to look at different studies. Sean, I found looking at the EPIC study and then going across to follow the Adventist health study, the Adventist mortality study, back to EPIC Oxford, EPIC Oxford vegetarian. There's such a variety. How can I possibly as a GP keep up to date with it? Mm-hmm. I'm delighted to see an organization like this. And actually, when I see their recommendations, I was hoping to show this sheet. The recommendations, 4 out of the 11 of them basically are saying, for God's sake, use a plant-based diet. But more beautifully, they're also taking a holistic approach. They're showing the strength of physical activity as well and keeping an ideal body weight and showing charts where you can show to patients the strength of each individual activity. In their charts, this wonderful matrices, even issues like screen time for children turn up. To me, this is a wonderful way of analyzing our lifestyle. I found it very inspiring looking at their website, and I strongly recommend it in terms of a resource for us. So maybe next month you'll come back and analyze it. That will be your You're one. I felt it gave me another tool that I would trust.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, John. And Ulrich, you wanted to get in there?
If I may,
Please,
I would always have a very healthy degree of suspicion against any of these state, semi-state, or non-governmental bodies. And at the end of the day, they are, with due respect to them, yes, they're experts, but at the end of the day, they're people like we are, and they're just looking at the papers which are presented to them and trying to make the best out of it. And they're as fallible or as good as the next person really around the corner. And the trouble is that they're putting, as you say, loads of papers together, and you really have to go back to the individual paper for the funding then to see what it is. And then it's also important which papers you put in that pot. I mean, you've seen that very stark recently on the stroke studies, where it was apparently claimed that vegans have a higher risk of stroke. But actually, if you looked at the paper and see what they've done, they've actually risk corrected so many times that all the people who had any risk of stroke were actually taken out of that group. And then they were compared with 4 vegans in that whole population. And then they claimed vegans had a higher risk of stroke. So you really have to go to the nitty gritty of the statistics sometimes to actually say, is this paper actually making a valid statement or not? Can I actually pull anything from that? And yes, you're very right. Then also has to look for the individual papers who is funding that, which can be quite a goose chase. And I agree entirely. It would be nice if there was a body one could just trust to make these recommendations. But you can only to a certain degree. And that's why today, despite my wife's warning, went ahead yet again. And so I went into a bit of the molecular nitty-gritty bit to understand how does it actually come about that cancer forms. And I think that's very, very important to understand that there's a basic research on a molecular level, on a lab level. There's a basic experimental research then which shows, yes, this is how it works. Yes, this is actually how it is functional. And then the research actually has to tally up with that. It has to make sense. If it does tell us something which biological doesn't make sense, then we have to keep questioning, how can this be? No.
Thank you, Ulrich. John and Ulrich, I just have a question for both of you, whoever wants to take it up. I think everyone in the group will be aware that in 2019, the Canadian Minister for Health announced that their new dietary guidelines would not be based on corporate funding, but rather on the totality of the science. And very interestingly, they removed, as we all know in the group, just for anyone who doesn't, they removed dairy as a separate food group and incorporated dairy into the protein section, which actively promoted plant-based protein. So my question is, as a teacher who sees the food pyramid so often in Ireland, I find it frustrating. And could I get John and Ulrich's opinion as to, I would put forward that the reason why dairy, and I see just there last week on the updated guidelines for 1 to 4-year-olds, as far, I could be corrected on this, but I think we're promoting 3 portions of dairy for 1 to 4-year-olds. And I'm going to put out there that this is due to the perceived importance of dairy for the Irish economy, rather than the science. Could I have your opinion on that, John, and then Ulrich, in whatever order?
I certainly see how you're in a difficult spot there. And one of the strong things I suppose you can point out when you're dealing with your students is that your plant-based approach will help them keep their weight down, will help them in terms of how they feel, and will, with your culinary skills, just give them a wider menu to deal with. We tend to be very limited. You are tackling something that's deeply embedded in our psyche, the dairy. So it is difficulty. I'm sure it's very difficult when you're dealing with the pyramid to tackle that, when the Irish pyramid is there. That's why I really liked this circle, if I may show it. This is the circle that the World Cancer Research Fund use. And rather than it being just one particular item, and we can get so caught up in it. It's saying, look, let's be more active. Let's keep a healthy weight. Let's eat a diet rich in whole grain vegetables, fruit and beans. Let's cut down fast food, processed foods. Let's cut down red and processed meat, limit sugar and sweet drinks, limit alcohol for the adults, don't use supplements, and for mums to breastfeed. So it's getting away from the fighting over one particular item and trying to take a more holistic view. And I think that's where we're really going to be able to help and tailor our message to our different audiences, rather than find that, you know what, there are two people in the classroom whose dads and uncles are making a living off farming or dairy, and they'll get into a huff about it. That would be my take on it.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Well, I would be a bit more suspicious, like you are, Sean, that there is, and I think you had actually said that very right in your title, Sir John, that there is this dairy industry is a bit of the holy cow, and each country has their holy cow. Back home in Germany, we have the car industry as our holy cow, and you can't say anything against the car industry. And here it's a bit the dairy industry, really, which is the holy cow. And we have seen that now, that the dairy industry has sort of the Dairy Council, and that's a weird thing. They're called the Dairy Council, so we're giving them this state-like authority, making it to the public sound, oh yes, this is the government, this is the state telling us what to do. But they're just an interest lobby, right? They're just an industrial lobby. But the people are made to believe by this title is actually state body. So they've launched this big program now as COVID came for home education. I don't know if you all saw that. And it was all about dairy, and then mixed in a bit under the cloth of sort of healthy nutrition. And the young ones were sort of brainwashed, really, that dairy is the only thing which keeps them alive. And I think that's very, very sad in this day and age, that the Department of Education, or that they just let this run through, they just let this happen, and they're ignoring the science. And we know now that early exposure to dairy is connected with type 1 diabetes, is connected with all the autoimmune diseases, which in children are mostly starting off as asthma and eczema. And all these sort of things we just let happen. We let our new generation be poisoned yet again and not doing anything about it. And I think that is very, very important that an organization like ours and our sister organization, the Irish Doctors for the Environment, that we really sort of use our knowledge and get out there and say, listen, the Dairy Council is not a state body. They are just giving the opinion from that industry. You know, we have to say clearly what the facts are. We are the doctors, a doctor group in Ireland. Let's put the facts on the table. Let the public know about it. You know, and as Michael Greger so nicely put it there when they were discussing the American cholesterol guideline, the guideline said, we set the level at 5 something that we don't frustrate the public, you know, but yes, accepting that many people die from cardiovascular disease. Michael Greger correctly said, well, it wouldn't be much more frustrating for the public to be known that they're not told the truth, and that is withheld from them what the real diet would be, what actually keeps them healthy, and what the real level would be. And I think that's important, that we don't cloak ourselves behind this political correct mantle and say, we don't want to upset the farmers. But the truth is, the farmers are upset as it is. They are on the tit of the subsidies from the EU, and they would actually make a much better income if they were led to crop-based organic farming or plant-based milk production or whatever it is. Anything would give them more money and get them off the state funding.
Brilliant, Ulrich. Thanks very much. And as a farmer's son, I completely agree that I think what's propping up a lot of Irish farming is the subsidies and the taxpayer subsidies. And to relocate them subsidies into agriculture that's not harming our health or our environment, I think would be very helpful. Andrea, you have a question you'd like to ask the group. So Andrea, I'll let you in. Hopefully that's... Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, just it's a little bit of circular thinking here, but we're promoting rest is best. which is dairy. And how does that marry with the health risks of eating dairy later on?
You're criticizing that we are promoting breast is best.
No. If if we're promoting breast is best,
Yeah.
are we at risk of losing some of our patients breastfeeding if we say anything about the risk to the health by eating dairy?
You're very right. It has to be very careful. We have to be very careful not that the public doesn't mix up these messages, because they're completely different messages. Of course, as I was trying to allude at the start of my talk, cow's milk is for the calf, breast milk is for the human baby, and that's why it is completely different. Its composition, completely different, and that's why manufacturers of a formula have to go through great loops to actually squeeze somehow dairy milk into the formula that is somewhat resemblance to breast milk, but it still isn't. Right? It still isn't. It's still a very different thing. And so it's very, very important to make that very, very clear that breast milk is the milk we should be drinking, our babies should be drinking, because that's obviously made exactly for the needs of the baby. And as we all know, the breast milk contains much less protein than dairy milk does, and has a much different structure in the fats and all that, and obviously contains all the immune factors, immune modulators, which are extremely important, and not to even mention the microbiome and all these other beneficial effects from the breastfeeding. So you're very right, we have to be very, very clear that this is completely different messages, and they have nothing to do with each other.
That is one of the recommendations of the World Cancer Research Fund, one of their 10 points for cancer prevention for mothers: breastfeed your baby if you can. So it's
Exactly.
being promoted strongly as a message against cancer.
Yes, and that is very correct. Yeah, that's another thing, that for the mother, of course, there's benefit in that too, not only for the baby. You know, the mother normalizes her weight better, she reduces her breast cancer risk, and all these other things.
Thanks for that.
Can I just ask,
Great.
I've heard a lot of experts talking on, in the case of mothers who are unable to breastfeed, and a lot of the experts that are promoting the benefits of human breast milk, they talk about donor milk.
Yes.
Is anyone aware of, and do you ever have to advise your patients on what's the situation in Ireland for donor milk for mothers? Is that an option, or is that something that hasn't been developed in Ireland?
It is developed. There's an option both to donate milk if you wish, and to receive donor milk. Obviously, there's only very limited supply of donor milk, so mostly we try to sort of let preterm babies benefit from that, if the mothers so wish. So they'd be the most important group to benefit from that. And but yes, donor milk can be availed of. It's not a very straightforward, very simple process, but it is possible. It's possible.
Is it affordable, Ulrich, as a process for mothers?
I would have to sort of come back to the group to sort of say what the cost implications, but I think it's mostly over some sort of government scheme, one way or others. I don't think there's a cost to the mother as such, because all maternity care per se is free in this country, as you're all aware. So I would believe that we still covered as perinatal expenditure. I don't think
I always wondered that. Thanks, Ulrich.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. Yeah.
John, there's very little breast milk donated, and it's held in a bank in Enniskillen, and it's life-saving really for preterm babies.
Yeah.
So in the case where like a mother is unable to breastfeed when they've had a preterm baby and the baby's very, very sick, they'd be basically very highly encouraged. But if they were really unwell themselves and they really couldn't, like, or if they're heroin addicts or whatever, then you would be contacting Enniskillen and they would be setting aside milk for you as an urgent, like mandatory. But certainly for the community at large, and if you're at home and your baby's really well, there's just not enough donor milk there. You can't just ring Enniskillen yourself and go and get it. They keep the very small supply they have for the ICU units in the maternity hospitals, So it's not like you can you can just go and order it. It's not like that. No, it's very very scarce.
It is, yeah.
Just emergency
Say
situations.
it's kept in a bank in Enniskillen. This vision of armed guards in case there's a clamour of new. So then formula is much easier than
Yeah.
Go
But
from there.
speaking of formula, I would certainly sort of say if a mother, for one reason or the other, decides not to breastfeed, whatever the motivation be, that one should inform and educate that there are soy formulas available so that you do reduce the risk of type 1 diabetes and atopic diseases. You know, so that certainly would be the preferred choice.
Excellent. Johnny, my connection is in and out here. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Johnny, I think you had another question, had you?
Yeah, I was going to come back to just a point that Ulrich mentioned earlier. And I think it was that sort of sense of, instead of striving for perfection, because we'll put loads of people off, we tend to try and include everyone by asking for less. And a lovely example of that was in the US. I remember seeing a study that said that if we exercise 30 minutes a day, we decrease mortality by 7%. And if you can exercise for an hour a day, you decrease mortality by 14%. And if you can go up to an hour and a half a day, it's 21%. And probably if you exercise all day long, you probably won't die. But what they did end up saying was they decreased their recommendations from 20 minutes per day to 10 minutes because most people are sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
And you can understand that at a population level, but it's a really poor message.
Yes.
Because if I'm doing 20 minutes a day and they say do 10, I'm not going to push up to an hour and a half. And the same has happened with the food pyramid.
Yeah.
That instead of saying we have a way that is better for you to eat, it's like, no, let's just just tell you to eat a little bit better than the crappy average.
Exactly. Yeah.
And probably the other point I wanted to make was one that came up with Roisin, Andre's daughter. Roisin is the head of sustainable diets in the Irish Doctors for the Environment. And we had a chat on Monday, and I think there was a little bit of irritation about the push for the dairy among the kids and who's there to counter that and who would listen. And we realized by chatting it through that if you look at the US example and you see that the USDA creates the food plate with all the vested interest of all the food industry and corporates. So instead of challenging that, which is really hard, Harvard comes out with its own food plate. And because it's Harvard, they can do that.
Yeah.
And it's sustainable and it's much healthier.
Yeah.
So a realization that we had on Monday was, instead of forcing the food pyramid to change, which is probably like hitting your head against a brick wall, it's possibly better to come up with a sustainable diet plate. There's loads out there, and get some organization to back it, probably related to a university, probably just to see if we can get a consensus. Because even just doing that, the media you could generate, the conversation you could generate, the fact that most people in Ireland aren't aware of the carbon footprint of dairy. It's not meant to be mentioned.
No, exactly.
I went to a talk in the Irish College of Physicians, the Royal College of Physicians in Ireland, and they didn't mention dairy.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned it to the guy who spoke about it, he mentioned meat. He said, "Oh, the farmers are having a rough time."
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that we shy away from anything that's difficult. So it sounds a little bit in your face, but if there is a truth that's a little bit further from the current one, there probably is a need to discuss it. It's not throwing it down anybody's throat, but it's to put it out there with an organization that would back it, saying this is what we say is a sustainable diet. You can say it's not right for the Irish population because they eat differently, but it still needs to be brought up.
But you see, Johnny, that's very important what you're saying. But to see the intimidation is enormous. Our own Mary Robinson, she had dared to speak against the dairy. She had dared to mention the climate impact of dairy. And she was reprimanded. Being the president, she was reprimanded for speaking out against it, right? That's how deep this sits. That's what we're up against, you know?
It's probably why I thought coming from Plant-Based Doctors Ireland was probably not a good idea. So somewhere that sounds a little less biased. Even Irish Doctors for the Environment, but if there was a connection with a university,
Yes.
but it's really just for the conversation. It's not that we're saying you cannot take these things.
Oh, you
It's an
can if you want to.
alternative, Robert. Yeah, that's brilliant.
There's a saying, culture beats strategy. Hard to break through culture.
Yeah, and that's why it is very important that one mentions these things always in connection with the improvement for the dairy farmers. I don't know if some people follow Refarmed. Have you heard of that organization? It's a lovely new European organization which helps farmers to transition from dairy milk to plant milk. And they've already worked with 3 farms, have them successfully transitioned. They're now running their first dairy milk to order. There's 2 farms in the UK, there's 1 farm in Switzerland, and they're open for any farmer who wants to make contact with them and to get transitioned. And I think that will be very important to have that at the ready. There's also this fantastic guy in Nature Rising. I think we had him at the last conference. You all remember him, or James O'Donovan. James O'Donovan has written this fantastic book, Transition to an Irish Vegan Agricultural System, which I dished out a few copies when I was at the last conference, and he spoke there himself. And he has very nicely put that together, the financial implications for the farmer for each scenario: cattle, beef, sheep, organic crop, and plant milks. And I think that is very, very important, that this is not anti-farming. If anything, it's pro-farmer, if anything. Or the farmer is actually better off not being on the leash of the subsidies and having their freedom to do what they actually like, to care for the land.
Yeah. Farmers in general seem to be struggling. And Ulrich, just to add to that point, I was shocked to see here recently that only 1% of Irish farming is crop farming.
Yes, that's right.
James O'Donovan. Is it O'Donovan or O'Donoghue?
O'Donovan, yes.
James O'Donovan was sharing an article that was saying that 1% of Irish agriculture is crop farming.
It's absolutely shocking.
I suppose.
And worldwide, we are talking about 85% for cattle and dairy and other animal agriculture. So it's a very small percentage which is left for crop farming worldwide. Very, very small. And it's also very important that when people talk about soy, that we debunk the misunderstanding, because people believe that GMO soy is fed to human. Nothing could be further from the truth. 98% of all soy worldwide produced is fed to animals as feed. The 2% of soy which are produced for humans are actually European soy, which we eat here in Europe, and they're not GMO. And they are not a problem from that point of view, with such a small percentage. But the dairy industry recently made a very successful advertising campaign, who was taken up by 10 of the major leading newspapers, where they reiterate this falsification which was spread by the Dairy Council. And so one has to be really, really careful. And we are up against a major industry here, who is only too happy to spread those false news.
Ulrich, has that man O'Donovan worked with Teagasc or approached Teagasc?
I'm not quite sure. I think that he certainly would be, but I'm not quite sure.
Teagasc wouldn't be interested
because
in
they need but they need expertise in Teagasc to reply to farmers who contact them looking to diversify.
Yes.
Even just to diversify a quarter of their farm. Or just to literally diversify. Like, they have officers there who specialize in diversifying farms. There would be someone,
The question is, are they too conservative in Teagasc to do that? And would 8Oct20 be the better organization to lead that?
Yeah, 8Oct20 though don't have a lot of access to farmers. But I just wondered, would there be someone in Teagasc? But you don't think so? Or maybe he has tried and it's failed.
I fear there isn't. If you look at Teagasc's website and see the support they have for farmers there, it's all intensified dairy, quicker rebirthing cycle, quicker impregnation cycles, all this sort of stuff. They don't seem to be sympathetic.
Yeah.
They don't appear to be sympathetic to the farmer wanting to change.
Teagasc is funded by state grant in aid.
Yes.
Lead for research, advisory and training services, and income from national and EU competitive research programs, and revenue from farming activities and commodity levies.
There you go.
Yeah, parents or farmers pay them. Yeah. Okay.
Alan, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, how are you doing? Yeah, just from my experience with Chagas, that they would not be interested in diversifying.
No.
I mean, their main interest is dairy, promoting dairy, and keeping that industry going at all costs. Everything is geared towards that industry, and anyone who'd approach them with anything else, no interest. Every talk or every person they have working for them, it's completely designed just to keep dairy nutrition and the dairy industry going.
Yeah.
There would be they would have no interest approaching farmers to give them alternative ideas or anything else. Like even if they're head nutritionists, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, Sinead McCarthy. I think Connor mentioned one of her talks there with Indy and Dairy Council a few weeks ago, which is just will say anything just to keep dairy promoted. It doesn't matter how accurate the information is. It's just keep it there, keep it in the spotlight.
That's it.
Sean, can I ask Andre a question?
Yes, John, walk away, please.
Andre, how could we influence the ICGP to take on the brief to look at nutrition? Recently, there was a conference on a Saturday looking at cardiovascular issues, and it was really sad to see that nutrition didn't even appear as part of it. Is there some way we can use planetary medicine or sustainability to try and lever open that door and at least get it as part of the discussion, or a template at which any area should be looked at?
John, the first thing you should do is write that in writing to Fintan Foy.
Very good.
And Fintan is?
CEO.
The
CEO of ICGP.
And what would your insight be of that having any traction, or are there ways that we could work on it having traction? Should it be brought up at AGM level, or?
Well, let's see what his response is, but there is a lot of traction in members writing personal letters to the senior management of ICGP. I do have some good news for you. Sean and John and Louise and Aoife and I have been working a little bit behind the scenes on trying to consider how we might influence ICGP to take on a planetary health team. And so we met with them actually this afternoon at 4:30 this afternoon. And so I can officially tell you that planetary health is now going to be a working group in ICGP.
Fantastic news. Fantastic news. Well done. Well done. Very good. Brilliant.
Where the Fintan Foy and Dermot Folan were both on the Zoom, along with Sean and Johnny here. And we had our challenges, as you can imagine, because this goes back a long time ago. Even when we were talking health and safety in general practice, we were receiving letters saying, how can you load health and safety on us? We're up to our eyeballs. 20 years ago, when we weren't loading health and safety on, it was the Health and Safety Authority loading. So there's a whole lot of, issues with workload, and it's always on balance with workload. However, it was finding a place for it to sit. And so the consensus was that it would sit best in the Quality, Safety and Standards Committee. And so the chair of that committee is Velma Harkins, a GP in Offaly who has an interest in diabetes and diabetes management in general practice. So that should be interesting. So they will write to her and we will await her response. And hopefully that's where the committee will sit. The working group will sit, and then we will formulate our plan of action for the coming year.
Very good. Fantastic.
Well done. That's a great
Well,
achievement.
that's fantastic, guys.
Yeah.
Well done, everyone involved there. That's amazing. Was there any other comments that anyone would like to make? And Sean, I'll pass over to you if towards the end. Johnny, go on ahead.
I had a little comment, or a little aside there, John, in terms of sending a letter to the ICGP. That'd be cool. If you say nutrition and its relationship to planetary health, that'd be cool. In the meeting today, there was an influential member, John Cox, who seemed very responsive to lifestyle medicine. So for me, you get planetary health, and then you get lifestyle medicine, and all GPs are willing for that. So that's going to be, it's got great potential. But I did have, and I'm sorry to go aside with this, but a little mention back to the debate that, John, you mentioned with all your evidence that there was limited suggestive evidence for benefit in prostate cancer. And then you said you'd concede to Ulrich, which I didn't think was...
I'm sorry, give me that one back again.
What you seemed to say was that there was, the overall consensus was there was limited suggestive evidence of prostate cancer.
That's incorrect. So I should certainly correct that, and I'm very glad you brought it up, Johnny. Dairy products, of course, are linked to a worse outcome in prostate cancer, and that's why the evidence to use dairy, the health effects of dairy for bowel cancer would be negated by the fact for men that it has a negative effect in prostate cancer, given that it's elderly men who are getting both bowel cancer by and large. They're heading into the territory of when they'll be getting prostate cancer. It's hardly likely that you can say, look, take dairy or calcium supplements when we know that the dairy will worsen the prostate cancer. So I'm very glad you corrected that if I said that. No, certainly the evidence was that there's a worse outlook in prostate cancer with dairy.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
The only point I would make with it is that whether it's colorectal cancer and dairy is beneficial, I would argue fiber is more beneficial than dairy.
That's why I really liked that the World Cancer Research Fund presented the data. You know, they showed the massively positive effect of simple things like exercise and achieving a normal body weight. And the fact that, yes, all the things that we love about our plant-based diet, eating a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruit and beans, they're still true. Vegans do better than vegetarians, do better than omnivores with bowel cancer in outlook. You can't take from these facts, but there is this anomaly that throughout the range of milk, there is a non-linear, of dairy, there's a non-linear linear association of improved outcome, which is also associated with total calcium, but not associated with plant forms of calcium. And we just have to look at this and try and tease it through. It doesn't take the fact that we still have a very positive message about the plant-based approach to life in terms of total mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and improving one's approach to cancer.
Okay. May I actually come into that? As I had hoped to show, but obviously have failed, the positive effect of calcium was mainly due to the effect that it binds up the secondary bile acids. Now, but these secondary bile acids only come about because of the saturated fatty acids we're eating with animal products in the first place. So it's actually biting itself into its tail there, right? So by dairy, which has saturated fatty in it, and if you have an omnivore who has this fatty diet who eats this whatever chicken, meat, or whatever he eats, he or she eats, and then having a bit of dairy, yes, this person's probably a bit better off than if that person was drinking a Coke to it, right? But if the person wasn't having the fatty acids in the first place, that person wouldn't even have these bile acids, so never mind the calcium or not.
Ulrich, the one anomaly there was one would expect to see a different outcome than with low fat versus high fat milk, full fat milk. And whether it was low fat milk or high fat, there still was the same positive effect. So it didn't appear to be linked to the amount of saturated fatty acid somebody was taking in their diet.
The reason for that is that the fat is only the fat in the milk you're considering. But obviously this person is an omnivore, so they're having fat from other animal products. That's why that is irrelevant.
There was a benefit that was linked to the amount of calcium they were taking, irrespective of the amount of fat. That is.
But they didn't correct for other fats. They didn't correct for the fats that person had otherwise in the diet. They only changed the fat in the milk. But that person was obviously eating their steak and their chicken and whatever else where they were getting saturated fatty acids.
That's you that, Ulrich, but I would assume they would. I mean, that you try and cancel out any other variable. I mean, I can't.
Yeah, that's always the trouble with these nutrition studies, that you don't know what else these people are eating.
But if it was showing that a high fat was a higher risk, that if the full fat milk was more of a risk, surely that would be more in keeping. Or if cheese was more linked to a poorer outcome, it wasn't. So it does appear to be that there did seem to be a benefit linked to the amount of calcium. Now, maybe you could get away with calcium supplements. It's just an anomaly. I'm curious that it's there. I'm back with my green jacket on and happy to do so. I just feel I'm going to be very careful in treading this area when I'm dealing with an elderly person and I have to look them in the eye and say, I really want you to look at your dairy. I'll be a little more cautious and perhaps promoting other areas, trying them to get more of their lycopenes in, get more of their fiber in. Perhaps I'll be a little more gentle on the whole question of dairy with it.
Why not suggest him to get his calcium from dark leafy greens and do not have to worry about all the other rest?
And that is one of the issues, though, that there was no benefit shown, Ulrich, from taking your calcium from plant-based. The possible reason being the oxalates and the phthalates that bind the calcium, which is an anomaly that turned up in the studies.
There was actually, you remember I showed that slide, the dogfin on the studies, they actually did show that non-dairy calcium didn't have a connection with cancer. Yeah, so they actually did show that. That is actually shown. The non-dairy calcium actually does achieve the same beneficial effect.
Did not have the same beneficial effects. So we're left that supplemental calcium and dairy calcium did. It's just an anomaly that is difficult to walk away from. But that's what we're here to try.
So we're up against, yes. Very good.
And thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to the next session where I can sit and sit back and scratch my head and enjoy the display. It's great to be with like-minded people and with these issues. Thank you all for giving your evening. And Sean, I hope nobody told you the results of the soccer so you can enjoy it.
I haven't heard too many roars from downstairs, so I presume it's still 0-0. So all going well, I get extra time.
Well, finally, just Sean, well done, and John and Ulrich, that was magnificent, and also just a welcome / goodbye to Joey and Louise and Andre. This might be the first time you've all met the group, and Alan and Diana. We haven't seen you in so long, so this has been brilliant. So great idea, particularly John Dagnan for organising and getting the ball rolling. So we'll do it again.
Thanks, John.
And Sean and the invisible ones, Tom, Eva, Maria, and Haley.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a good night.